The tragedy of Oprah Winfrey is not that the world knows her voice. It is that the world has celebrated that voice for decades without fully understanding the pain that gave it strength. For generations, she has been the woman people turned to for hope, a voice that comforted survivors, inspired dreamers, challenged presidents, and encouraged millions to believe that healing was possible. She became a symbol of resilience, compassion, and extraordinary success. Today, the world sees Oprah standing confidently among global leaders and cultural icons, honored on the biggest stages, applauded for a lifetime of influence, and remembered as one of the most powerful women in media history. To most people, her story is proof that determination can overcome any obstacle. But long before the awards, the standing ovations, and the billion-dollar empire, there was a frightened little girl growing up in rural Mississippi, a child who experienced poverty so severe that she wore homemade clothing while classmates laughed at her, a girl who endured abuse before she was old enough to understand what was happening, a teenager who faced unimaginable loss before she had even reached adulthood. Those experiences left wounds that fame, wealth, and worldwide admiration could never completely erase. For decades, Oprah encouraged millions of people to confront their pain, forgive those who hurt them, and believe they deserved a better future. Yet some of the deepest chapters of her own life remained, far more complicated than the advice she offered to others. How does someone spend a lifetime helping strangers heal while still carrying scars from childhood? How does a woman become one of the strongest voices in the world after spending her earliest years believing that her own voice didn't matter? This is not simply the story of Oprah Winfrey's success. It is the story of survival, heartbreak, extraordinary resilience, and a lifelong search for peace behind one of the most recognizable voices in modern history. If this story moves you, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Now, let's return to the beginning, before the fame, before the television empire, before the world knew the name Oprah Winfrey, and discover where that remarkable journey truly began. Before Oprah Winfrey became one of the most recognizable women in the world, her life began in circumstances that offered little reason to believe she would ever escape poverty. She was born on January 29, 1954, in the small town of Kosciuszko, Mississippi, during a period when racial segregation still shaped everyday life across much of the American South. Opportunities were scarce, especially for Black families living in rural communities, and from the very beginning, Oprah's future seemed uncertain. Her mother, Vernita Lee, was still a teenager when Oprah was born and struggled to provide the stability a child needed. Her father, Vernon Winfrey, served in the military and lived separately. As a result, Oprah spent her earliest years being raised by her grandmother, Hattie Mae Lee, on a modest farm where life was simple, demanding, and often difficult. The family lived with very little. There was no luxury, no comfort, and few possessions. Oprah later recalled wearing homemade clothes while other children laughed at her appearance. Those moments left lasting memories, reminding her from an early age what it felt like to be judged before anyone knew her story. Yet among those hardships, one extraordinary gift changed the direction of her life forever. Her grandmother believed education could open doors that poverty could not close. Before Oprah was old enough to attend school, she was already learning to read. Books became more than entertainment, they became an escape, a teacher, and eventually the foundation of the powerful voice the world would come to know. At church, she was encouraged to stand before the congregation and read passages from the Bible aloud. While many children would have been intimidated by speaking in front of adults, Oprah discovered something unexpected. Words gave her confidence. Speaking gave her purpose. Even as a little girl, people noticed the emotion and conviction in her voice, but those early years were far from perfect. Discipline in her grandmother's home was often strict, and Oprah later described punishments that left emotional scars alongside the lessons she carried throughout life. Love and hardship existed side by side, creating a childhood filled with both encouragement and fear. As she grew older, another major change arrived. She left rural Mississippi and moved to Milwaukee to live with her mother. hoping life in the city would bring new opportunities. Instead, it introduced a different kind of loneliness. Her mother worked long hours trying to survive, leaving little time to supervise her daughter or recognize the emotional struggles quietly growing beneath the surface. It was during these years that Oprah faced experiences no child should ever endure. Betrayal came from people she should have been able to trust, and the pain she carried remained hidden for years. Rather than speaking openly, she learned to bury her emotions deep inside herself. Looking back decades later, Oprah often reflected that silence became one of her earliest survival skills. She smiled when she was hurting, stayed quiet when she was afraid, and convinced herself that keeping painful secrets was easier than risking disbelief or rejection. Those silent years would shape the rest of her life in ways no one could have imagined. Ironically, the little girl who once believed her voice didn't matter would one day build a career by helping millions of others find theirs. The strength the world admired wasn't created by fame, it was forged during the darkest chapters of her childhood. Long before anyone knew her name, the greatest challenges, however, were still waiting ahead, and the next chapter of Oprah's life would test her resilience more than ever before. By the time Oprah reached her early teenage years, the emotional weight she had carried for so long had become almost impossible to hide. Behind the smile she showed the world was a young girl struggling with fear, confusion, and overwhelming loneliness. The trauma she had experienced during childhood continued to shape her decisions, leaving her searching for safety and acceptance in a life that rarely offered either. As the pressure built, her behavior began to change. She started acting out at school, challenged authority, and occasionally ran away from home. To many people, it looked like rebellion, but beneath those actions was a child desperately asking for help in the only way she knew. Everything reached a turning point when she became pregnant at just 14 years old. Still a child herself, Oprah suddenly found herself facing an unimaginable reality. Overwhelmed by shame and afraid of disappointing everyone around her, she kept the pregnancy hidden for months. She later admitted that fear controlled nearly every decision she made during that period of her life. When the truth finally came to light, events unfolded quickly. Her son was born prematurely, but survived only a short time before passing away. The loss was devastating. Before she had even begun to understand what it meant to become a mother, she was forced to experience the grief of losing a child. Years later, Oprah would describe that chapter as one of the darkest moments of her life. She felt isolated, hopeless, and convinced that her future had already been destroyed. There were moments when she questioned whether life was worth continuing at all. But just when everything seemed beyond repair, someone entered her life with a different vision for her future. Her father, Vernon Winfrey, believed his daughter was capable of far more than the mistakes that threatened to define her. He welcomed her into his home in Nashville and established clear rules, firm discipline, and high expectations. Education became non-negotiable. Every week Oprah was expected to read books, expand her vocabulary, complete written reports, and maintain excellent grades. At the time, those rules may have felt demanding, but they created something she had rarely experienced before: a stable environment built on structure, accountability, and belief in her potential. For the first time, an adult consistently expected her to succeed rather than fail. That change transformed everything. Instead of seeing herself only through the lens of her painful past, Oprah slowly began imagining a different future. She immersed herself in literature, discovered powerful writers whose words reflected courage and resilience, and realized that stories had the ability not only to educate, but also to heal. Books became trusted companions. Libraries became places of peace. And language became the bridge between the frightened girl she had been and the confident woman she hoped to become. As her confidence grew, so did her ability to speak before audiences. Teachers noticed her talent. Classmates admired her confidence. Public speaking contests became opportunities not just to compete, but to prove to herself that her voice mattered. No one watching those early speeches could have predicted what would come next. The teenager, who had once believed her life Oprah was preparing to enter broadcasting. A microphone would soon replace the silence that had defined so much of her childhood, and the voice that had survived years of pain was about to reach listeners far beyond the walls of a classroom. Without realizing it, Oprah Winfrey was standing at the doorway of the career that would eventually change television and change millions of lives around the world. The remarkable thing about Oprah's rise is that it did not begin with celebrity or national television. It began with a young woman who simply knew how to connect with people. While still attending high school in Nashville, she entered local speaking competitions and beauty pageants that emphasized communication and public speaking. Her confidence, warmth, and natural storytelling ability quickly set her apart. One competition opened a door that would change her life forever. At just 17 years old, Oprah was offered a part-time position reading the news at a local radio station. For most teenagers, it would have been an intimidating experience. For Oprah, it felt strangely familiar. The little girl who had once found comfort reading scripture aloud in church was now speaking to an audience far beyond the walls of a sanctuary. It was the first time her voice became more than a survival tool. It became her future. She continued to develop her skills while attending Tennessee State University, balancing college life with growing responsibilities in broadcasting. Her talent did not go unnoticed. Before long, she accepted a position at a Nashville television station, becoming one of the youngest African American women to anchor a local evening newscast. It was a remarkable achievement, especially considering how few opportunities existed for Black women in television journalism during that era. From the outside, it appeared that everything was finally falling into place, but television news demanded emotional distance. Reporters were expected to remain composed, detached, and objective, regardless of the stories they covered. That wasn't who Oprah was. When interviewing people who had suffered loss or hardship, she didn't simply ask questions. She empathized. She listened. Sometimes she became emotional herself. What some managers viewed as a weakness was actually revealing the gift that would one day make her unforgettable. In 1976, another opportunity brought her to Baltimore, Maryland, where she joined WJZ-TV as a news anchor. The move represented another major step forward, but it also came with new challenges. Once again, producers questioned whether she was suited for traditional news. She cared too deeply about the people behind the headlines, rather than reading scripts with polished detachment. She wanted to understand the human story. Eventually, station executives decided to move her away from the evening news and place her on a daytime talk program called People Are Talking. To many broadcasters, the reassignment looked like a setback. For Oprah, it became the turning point that changed everything. The format allowed her to do what came naturally. Instead of rushing through headlines, she could have real conversations. She laughed with guests, cried with them, and asked the kinds of questions most interviewers never considered. Audiences noticed the difference almost immediately. They weren't watching someone perform. They were watching someone genuinely care. Around that same time, another relationship quietly entered her life, one that would remain constant for decades. During a winter storm, Oprah invited a young television colleague named Gayle King to stay overnight because the roads had become too dangerous to drive. The two spent hours talking, sharing stories about their lives, their dreams, and their fears. What began as an unexpected evening turned into one of the strongest friendships in television history. For Oprah, whose childhood had been marked by instability and broken trust, having someone who offered unwavering loyalty became a rare and priceless gift. Through every success, every controversy, and every personal challenge, Gayle remained by her side. As the years passed, Oprah's confidence in front of the camera continued to grow. She was no longer trying to become the perfect news anchor. She was becoming something entirely different. Without realizing it, she was creating a style of television that didn't yet exist, one built not on polished performances, but on honesty, empathy, and genuine human connection. That authenticity would soon attract the attention of television executives in Chicago. The invitation they offered seemed modest at first, host a struggling morning talk show with disappointing ratings. Almost no one believed it could become a success. Within a matter of months, it would transform Oprah Winfrey from a respected local broadcaster into one of the most influential figures in American television history. No one in Baltimore could have imagined what was about to happen. The young broadcaster, who had been told she was too emotional for the evening news, was about to discover that emotion was never her weakness. It was her greatest strength. Every hardship she had survived, every silent tear, every painful memory had quietly prepared her for a role no one else could fill. A struggling television station in Chicago was searching for a new host. Executives believed they were simply hiring another presenter to improve weak ratings. They had no idea they were about to introduce America to a woman who would redefine daytime television forever. The next chapter would not simply change Oprah Winfrey's career. It would change the way millions of people talked about pain, hope, healing, and the power of being heard. And once America heard her voice, nothing would ever be the same again.